Hey, and welcome to another episode of Making the Right Play. I'm your host, Ishi, with my co host.
Manit.
Today we have a very special guest and one of my former roommates, Ketan Agrawal, on the show. How's it going, Ketan?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. You know, with this quarantine, long time no see, but it's
Yeah.
good to see you and good to meet
Yeah.
Mane too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
So like I met Ketan as a freshman at Stanford. We were both living in the same dorm, and you know, uh, ignoring the countless experiences we had freshman year, we've been roommates, through summers and through school years, and we know each other pretty closely. And I decided to bring him on the show because he has some very interesting thoughts on like the undergrad experience, and he's been a person who's done it all. I think he has some valuable tidbits to contribute to like the greater theme of the show. And yeah, Ethan, you're a SimSys major at Stanford, Symbolic Systems. Uh, you care
That's
to
right.
explain to the layman what that's about, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's the
Including me too.
question on everyone's mind, it seems,
Yeah.
when they learn about what SimSys is, or hear the name at least. So it's an interdisciplinary major, which means there isn't one like main focus. And you can kind of decide which area of the major you want to focus on, but the sort of primary areas you have are linguistics, philosophy, computer science, and psychology.
Hmm.
And sort of the synthesis of those things is trying to understand, trying to look at minds and look at machines from a sort of systems perspective. So seeing them as sort of like, you know, these complex intertwined systems. Um, sometimes studying them in isolation, sometimes studying minds and machines together. But yeah, just in general, looking at them at the sort of like component level, like so, like what are the parts that make up a brain? What are the parts that make up a computer? How do they interact with each other? Um, how do we think? How do computers think? And all those kind of questions. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can sort of go with SimSys, but you can take sort of more cognitive science angle.
Yeah.
Um, you could take a more philosophical angle. A lot of people are interested in sort of philosophy of mind. A lot of CS majors or CS focused people are less interested in the philosophy courses, but
Yeah.
those are there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We that was interesting. Like when you gave me the breakdown, there's a similar course. So it's not as cool. It's not named as cool as like symbolic systems, but I think the equivalent of at McGill is cognitive science, where I think you can just like pick your concentrations of like all of this. And I think people who are interested in that dive into like artificial intelligence and machine learning a lot. I think that's just the pathway that's kind of taken.
Right,
Uh,
right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to say there's a good segment of CS people who do SimSys at Stanford just to avoid
yeah.
taking CS
For
110,
sure.
which is like one of the toughest CS classes. But, Ketan's actually genuinely interested in the program. So
Yeah.
that's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha.
But yeah, I think Ketan and I had like a bunch of conversations about SimSys freshman year actually, and like I remember like fall quarter he talked to me about like what the program was and like what his interests were for like being in that program. Yeah, this was in like Ariaga, so like one late night we were doing like I don't know Math 51 or something. I think that was Winter Water actually, but you got into like how like you wanted to like learn about like human computer interfacing and that sort of thing, and to me it sounded really spooky, and you wanted to like explore like what is like so you kind of wanted to touch on it from like the cognition angle, right? And see like if that translates to like like what we have now as computer programs, and see if, like where can we interface those and things like that. I think that was like a cool discussion we had a while ago. It seemed kind of freaky to me, but like like as I got to know more about like what Simpsons actually is, it seemed like a like a very interesting kind of sidebar to it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's pretty accurate. I think like it started out so in high school I didn't have too much exposure to like the brain side of things or psychology. I was in my computer science classes in high school, really interested in, oh, I can make this cool computer art, or I can do these really cool things with programs. But then, I guess the summer before Stanford, I saw the thing for SimSys, and it just kind of like clicked. Like that could be something really cool. Like I feel like the brain is probably the most complex thing that we know of in the universe, and the study of it is you know that follows from that is going to be accordingly complex. And I think the interesting part is just how little we know about how cognition actually works. um,
Yeah.
But a counterpoint to that is that, you know, we essentially do know all the properties of computer systems, or at least, deterministic computers. We know how they work, we know exactly like all the ways that they function because we built them. I mean, we don't necessarily know everything they're capable of, but we do know, like, at a base level, like how they work. So in that way, they can kind of be like a good um, like model for how cognition works. Um, but yeah, I think the human computer interaction component is really interesting for me, and actually, that's something over the past quarter or so of my own explorations I've gotten quite a bit more interested in than before.
That
But
makes sense. And I've just like I've spoken to Ishir about you like multiple times before we had the episode, and like I heard that you've done like a bunch of things like research. You've worked at Amazon as like a software engineer and things like that, and you've had all these experiences outside like just the general like classroom work that a lot of people kind of get like entangled in. So I was just very curious about like what experiences like you're very fond of, and is there anything that the audience could kind of get from those experiences, and anything that you think would stand out from like your entire 3 years at Stanford.
yeah, for sure. Um, you know, I guess before I say that, I would say one thing I think I didn't do that I would have done
Yeah.
starting out is, um, I guess, to sort of be more of a part of Stanford, like be more of a
Okay.
part of, like, I guess, like social things, and like people who are like in vibrant groups and like, thinking about things like together. Not necessarily, it can be like clubs or like teams or just communities, but like, yeah, I think I've always been a very independent person. And, just this year I've sort of started dipping my toe outside the water into the water of, you know, collaboration with other people. And I've found it to actually be like, wow, like what was I missing out on?
Yeah,
But
I'm just gonna butt in and say like I have the same thoughts too. Uh, like we know each other and we've always been like pretty bounded to the space of our common room. But like yeah, there's like a ton of opportunities out there. And I feel like one of them is just the social interaction you can have with people working in similar problem spaces and things like that. And like I feel like everybody has this to some point, to some extent, like this kind of regret that they like, it's not a regret really. Like, it's kind of like this retrospective insight that they could have been a part of something else. But there's a ton of opportunity out there, and you should probably make some time to explore all of it. But yeah, like
yeah,
yeah, 100%.
I do remember, yeah, like something that I think Persis or someone said in our uh, introduction and new student orientation was like, oh, Stanford is not going to come to you. Like, you have to go and like
Yeah.
find your stuff, which, maybe she could have said that a couple more times because I guess I didn't internalize it immediately.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think better late than never. But yeah, I guess I would say is like in parallel to that, I do think like I have gained a lot from like my own like independent explorations. Um, I think like charting your own path is kind of a skill that you can learn. Um, it doesn't necessarily come naturally that to do things independently. Um, and like charting your own path, like developing your own taste and curiosity for interesting problems is something that you can learn by basically just trying and looking for stuff that's interesting, and maybe trying and making something, and like you're like, oh, like this is kind of interesting, like this thing is kind of similar to this thing, I want to make this thing. um but yeah, I think having taken the gap quarter and working on some passion projects of mine the past quarter, I've learned just as much about like sort of how to explore as much as I'm learning about like the things that I'm exploring themselves.
Yeah. And Keith, I know you've been a Twitter personality recently, and you've been tweeting about all these like different things on, you know, like there's all these different terms thrown around, but I feel like a lot of them is just like interpretation of different kinds of like media and like related to like basically a lot of stuff on like the HCI or human computer interaction kind of end of things. Like I know that that's also where a lot of your like kind of passion projects are. You want to like maybe just like give us a little taste of what that's like for you and why you enjoy doing it?
Yeah. So I think I I recently watched, I was watching some videos by Brett Victor, who's sort of a pioneer in kind of thinking about some of these spaces, like the human computer interaction spaces, and it really like keyed me into the fact that we've really only scratched the surface of ways that we have to interact with computers and things that we can do with computers. Um, so yeah, I think like it's like it's a fun sort of space to experiment with because it's really, um, I would say that the initial like the effort needed to get involved with this field is like maybe a little less than some more technical fields. Like I would say like AI and like machine learning, that kind of takes a lot of prerequisite skills. But with human computer interaction, like it's like very basic things like, how do we make computers do things? Um, One project I did this quarter that, I found pretty rewarding was to actually make a sort of smart glove. Um, so basically, I wired up this tiny computer called Raspberry Pi with some wires and wired up some buttons to the computer, and you can essentially configure the buttons to do anything you want. Like you can configure them to start playing a Spotify song, or add a song to a playlist, or change the color of your internet connected light bulbs, or you know um, send a message on Messenger. Um, but yeah, it's like just fun things like that. It's really fun to interact with things in your environment, especially things that you wouldn't normally interact with like digitally.
Yeah, that's interesting. And like that's like your personal interest, right? Like you also do stuff for like research, like as part of like the like the labs for Stanford and things like that. You worked in a psych lab for some stuff, some time, and then you worked on computer vision projects and things like that. And coming into Stanford, I didn't think that was a huge part of the Stanford experience. Like that wasn't like even in my head really doing research because I hadn't heard about it. Being freshman and all of that.
Yeah,
But then I came in. I met you, Thomas, Chris, and you guys are getting involved with your own research stuff at Stanford. And then I found my like kind of niche there. I
yeah,
think it's a very critical path for anybody really involved in fields that might be like quantitative leaning or like more academic really. And I feel like a lot of first gen students miss out on that experience. And
mm,
like, do you want to like talk about like what the things you've done and like the ways you've like benefited from it? And then me and Monica can add on.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think like I can definitely see how like there's a large barrier to entry sort of for research, like just in terms of like whatever like technical know-how, or like sort of the know-how that these opportunities even exist, right? Um, yeah, like I guess it wasn't really a thing that I thought about too much, but then fall sophomore year, I was like, oh, all these people I know are doing cool research. Maybe I'll do something like too. So I reached out to a couple of labs, just kind of like blanket emailed because I didn't really know how to like get involved. A lot of professors, I think like the vast majority, did not respond at all, which is to probably be expected. But one did, and I ended up scheduling to go to his office hours and sort of talk about, or just directly ask him, can I do something in your lab, like with the skills that I have? And yeah, so my PI is named Mike Frank, and he basically was like, yeah, like I'll talk to like people and see if there's anyone. Um, and he found one of his postdocs who sort of needed someone with my skill set, and ended up getting involved with this project that's it's like rooted in basic psychology research, but we ended up using more computer vision slash like artificial intelligence stuff to methods to achieve it. So yeah, it's the basically the research was like this data set consisting of like videos that were recorded from infants' first person perspective. So they were wearing like a head cam, and they have like thousands of hours of video from these kids wearing head cams as they were growing up, basically over the course of like 2.5 years, I want to say. And yeah, so like my job, I guess, as a research assistant was to sort of use the computer vision to see if we can find any trends like over time in terms of like their social environment, like how many faces are they seeing, how many hands and like manual gestures are they seeing as they're growing up, and like how do those ratios, like how do those proportions change over time. But yeah, and I think like as far as like how it benefited from it, I think it taught me a lot about uh, one sort of like like the independent exploration thing. I hadn't done too much of that before, but like it was like figuring out how to sort of manage my own time and like set my own goals and like also have some curiosity of yourself, like what kind of questions do you want to answer as like a researcher, which I don't think in classes necessarily like prod that type of curiosity.
No, go ahead. I know you were telling me about like Ketan and just like how he has like an entire knowledge management system. Could you just like expand on that and just like you know kind of prompt Ketan to kind of like speak about that?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, no, okay. So I don't know if he has a knowledge management system. I know he has like very interesting thoughts about like
Oh
knowledge
yeah, my
management
bad,
and
my
like
bad, my
how,
bad.
how to
Yeah,
go
yeah,
about that.
yeah,
But like,
yeah.
yeah, no, I think we've had like several like interesting conversations over the course of our time at college. Like, like over like how it is like the college experience structured as well as it can be. To like help you like maintain your standard of knowledge. To like make sure you're not losing what you learn as you go on. And I think that's a big problem with what I've been through. Like I like with physics in general. Like if somebody asked me to like like do some random like retarded field calculation from like E&M, like I, it's just yeah, I'm not gonna be able to do that. But like that was very a core part of E&M, right? But and that's just because of the time elapsed between that and because I have to get rid of things that were important for things that are important.
Right.
uh yeah, over the course of college. And I know you have like some thoughts about that on the
Yeah.
whole, really. Yeah.
I mean, like, like you said, like use it or lose it, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
a lot of the things that we've taken freshman year, like it's just, has gone out the other end. Like we don't really remember that anymore, um, for better or for worse. Yeah, and I think like that's part of the problem. It's like classes are kind of presented sequentially. So it's like you get the material once, you study it a lot, and presumably you take an exam or do a project or something like that. But then after that, like most of that material for that course, unless it's like a direct prerequisite for something else, like it just becomes irrelevant. And since you're not using it anymore, you just lose that information. I mean, like our memories degrade. Like that's just the way that human memory is. But
Yeah.
I think that you know taking notes is valuable because essentially that's a form of memory that does not degrade. um, you can essentially treat your notes like your quote unquote second brain. And there's a lot of people on Twitter and elsewhere talking about building second brains.
Yeah.
Tiago Forte is one of them. I think it's another problem is like we've talked a bit about the divide between classes and practicum, like classes and like the actual like real world uh, things that these classes are supposed to be teaching about. And I think part of the problem is just these classes are so self-contained. Like they're these neat little boxes, and all the knowledge of the class makes sense within itself, but it doesn't really make too much sense like in relation with other things, because like there's no one there who's like you know magically connecting the dots and showing you like, oh, like this is how this stuff from this class relates to this stuff from like this other class, or this stuff from this job you did, or this stuff from research you did. Like that's kind of something that's left to you yourself. And I think that's another thing that note taking, specifically like linked note taking, can help with. uh, like I think basically taking notes is good. It's good, period, but I think it's even better if you have a way for your future self to like discover the notes again. um, Otherwise you might just end up like collecting a bunch of information that you never look at again. And yeah, so like there are like a couple ways you can like achieve that. One way being like making links between notes, and that's actually been a really quickly growing area of interest for a lot of people. um, Trying to make sort of linked note folders of linked notes where each note has sort of like hyperlinks to other notes,
Mhm.
and you can go both ways. So if you like click a hyperlink to one note, you can see all of the hyperlinks that lead to that note. So you could go back. You could go back out to the previous note that you were in. And in that way, if you have this set of notes where like all the different notes are like sort of densely connected to each other,
Yeah.
then you kind of have this thing where it's like, oh, it's kind of like this web where like, oh, look, if I have a thought about this thing, I know it's connected to this thing and this thing and this thing, and these things are connected to these things and so on. Um, so yeah, I think it's like in a sense kind of mirroring how our brain works, right?
Yeah.
Like we think in associations, and it's good to have those kind of associations in your notes as well.
And
Most
I
of.
know I've been pretty like trash about taking notes really, because like for me honestly, like I feel like I'm a person who, okay, so maybe note taking is like, for me it's been good on the recall end, but for actually ingesting the material, I found that note taking didn't really help me, and it's different from person to person, right? I guess because like I remember I took CS106A, which is like the first CS class at Stanford, and I took notes that class, and then CS1, like I did well in that class, but like
Hmm.
CS106B, I never referred back to my notes for some reason, and then CS106B I just like went and just sat in lecture, like I didn't do anything, I just like listened to the lecture, right? And
Yeah,
for some reason in CS classes I've never taken notes, right? And like you know maybe I'm suffering on the recall end, and also like the CS classes actually have like decent like pre-written notes you can refer to, so that's like a
for
nice part
sure,
of it.
for sure.
But like I felt like for me, like my recall was greatly helped, and I was just like fully present at the moment, because like I don't know, like physical note taking for me has always been an issue, because I have this tendency to kind of like zone out and just like it's like monkey here, monkey do kind of thing, right? Like and like I'm not really interpreting it as I should, and like understanding it sometimes. I don't know if you have had experience with that same thing, or like if you have like a different
Actually,
strategy
yes.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, same. Like I think a lot of times in class I just zone out and like don't finish like taking notes like in the moment. And I think I've gone through a lot of lecture classes in the sort of same mode where I don't really like take like detailed notes per se, or I just end up doodling on the page where I was supposed to take notes. Um, but yeah, I guess you know I think I guess it's all about the end goal, right? Like I think like essentially for me, part of the note is not just getting down the content of that class, or at least what I've been trying to do over the past quarter, like reviewing a bit of the past classes I've taken and like the knowledge that's contained inside of them. It's not just like getting the knowledge within each class. It's trying to see like how to like compose all this, this sort of crap ton of knowledge that we've gotten through these classes, and like how does it connect to each other, and like how can you like sort of build it into something like more cohesive. A lot of times I feel like if you don't put intentional effort, especially into something like SimSys, it can feel a little bit like incoherent.
Yeah.
But I do feel like taking notes can add some coherence to that. Adding links between notes can add like some sort of coherence to that. Like you know, and the nice thing about making linked notes is that like you don't need to like sort of know the whole structure beforehand. Like you just start making links here and there and like adding more and more links, and then eventually the sort of overall structure of your notes, like you can imagine them as sort of like this web of notes, like it emerges
Yeah.
from that, which is cool.
Yeah. Like, yeah, like I also feel like for me, like I find sometimes when, lecture material or like course material doesn't work for me, I end up going to like a different school's kind of, equivalent course
Yeah.
website. And then they have the same thing explained through a different viewpoint, right? So like, and I think those are kind of important things for me, like important resources as I went about the process. I know like last quarter I took this algorithms class at CS161, and like I didn't feel like the teaching was really speaking to me in that class, so I ended up going to a bunch of Cornell courses and
Yeah.
a course at Brown, and they had like these different explanations of these data structures and algorithms, and that made more sense to me from once I went through it. And I think you also have to find like this style of kind of, I don't know, dissemination, information dissemination that works for you, because some lectures are very like ground up. Excuse me, they're very ground up, but I actually kind of prefer a top down approach, because I tend to be a person who, if I know how the whole structure works, I and you give me some detail about the inner workings, I'm able to like kind of like make sense of it and kind of link the pieces together, and I find that helps me more than actually be like told like this is how it links better, because like I internalize it better that way. It's just like there's these unique styles of doing it, I guess, and like figuring out which style works for you is important. But like I 100% agree. Like I think I also need to like dive into like the whole like webbing thing and figure out where my stuff, like where my like individual nodes of knowledge link up with each other. Because I see these like recurrent themes in my physics courses, right? Like you like approach the same problem from like a stat mech perspective and a quantum perspective, right? And you end up with the same answer but two different ways, and you've like completely forgotten what the other approach was by the time you get to like stat mech, right? So like maybe if there was like maybe if I was better at my note taking, I could like go back and find a way to like link those things up and just go about that whole process. But that would be nice, really. Anyway, I think that concludes like this episode of Making the Right Play. Thank you, Ketan, for coming on, and that's been an awesome
Cool.
conversation.
Yeah,
And
guys.
that's always good to have
Thanks so
you.
much.
Yeah, no worries. And to all the viewers who made it this far, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Making the Right Play. Thanks for listening to another episode of Making the Right Play. You can find our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, Content. This will keep you posted on new episodes, bonus content, and blooper reels. We hope you make the right play.